What types of foam are there? High density foam and low density foam. High density foam is simply a more compressed material, making it less prone to deformation. It's also more expensive than low density foam and it's harder to cut. I used this foam for my first Mandalorian armor, but now I only use low density foam. Well, let's come to low density foam. Low density foam has larger pores and is easier to bend. Those are the two types of foam, high density foam and low density foam. Both types come in various thicknesses. I mostly use 2mm, 5mm and 7mm thicknesses. Armor pieces typically range from 5mm to 7mm. Sometimes I use 10mm, but I prefer 10mm for bulkier weapons. 2mm and 1mm are often referred to as scruff foam and are usually cheaper under that name. I use 2mm when it comes to details, while I use the thicker foam for the larger pieces. For example, this is 5mm foam and all these details are made from 2mm foam. And this one too. When transferring a pattern to foam, you can use a ballpoint pen. However, for black foam and darker foam, I prefer to use tailored chalk because it's more visible on the dark surface. I then lay my pattern on top. You can either trace it normally, but for small details in corners, it tends to slip. My tip is to take the chalk and lightly go over it, which results in a much cleaner line. For cutting foam, a cutter works best. I use a simple disposable utility knife, which allows you to replace the blades, making it more economical. You press down here to open it. And these are the blades I use. You can take them out and replace them with new ones. When the blade becomes dull, you can snap it off, but be careful not to let it fly into your eye. Wrap the old blade, regardless of its size, in painter's tape before throwing it away, so that animals are not injured later. Once you have your pattern down, it's time to cut it out. Always use a sharp blade. Follow the lines carefully. For angle cuts, position the blade at an angle instead of straight, and then cut. I will show that in more detail here. The sides are cut straight, while these edges are angled. The blade hasn't cut all the way through, make another cut in the same spot to create the angle. And here is a straight cut example. You will end up with two pieces. The angle cut means the sides will be angled towards each other when glued together. Now let's move on to gluing. I use contact cement, also known as shoe glue, which you can find on Amazon. I've linked below. But these are all just my personal experiences. You can open the cap like this or use scissors. When working with glue, it's better to open a window. So either glue outside or work with open window. If you have a mask, I'm not talking about the simple mask, about one that really filters gases, you can wear that, but still keep the window open. The warning labels on the can are there for a reason. I have learned a trick of using foam leftovers for this. You dip the foam into the glue and spread it onto the foam. Later you can just throw away the foam scrap and don't have to wash any brushes. The glue dries on the foam, allowing you to use it multiple times. Eventually, the piece will become rancid, but until then, you can keep using it. You always end up with leftover scraps. That's just part of it. Spread the glue evenly, but don't stick the pieces together immediately. The process is as follows. Apply glue to both sides that need to be joined, wait 10 minutes, or use a heat gun on the lowest setting to speed up the process. Set them aside and wait until they are no longer stick to your fingers. Then you can connect the pieces. The longer you let it dry, the better the hold will be later. If you accidentally glue something together, you can also remove the glue. I use a heat gun to warm up the areas. Here are also some glue residues, which can be easily removed with painter's tape. I stick the tape over the area, heat it, and then pull the tape off, and the glue comes off. I'm also a big fan of working with foam clay, which feels like modeling clay. Here you can see that I didn't work cleanly, which resulted in a gap. I can go over the area with a bit of water and moisten it. I also add some water to the foam and knead it. Then I apply the foam clay to the gap and work it into the cavity. You can keep using water to smooth out the foam clay and then let it dry. With foam clay you can also shape balls or other organic forms, allowing you for a lot of creativity. Once the clay dries, it remains somewhat flexible and doesn't break easily, similar to rubber. We want to enhance the foam now. When cutting with a utility knife, the edges can appear very sharp. While that's good for adhering edges together, it can look too angular at producing corners. For these corners, it's worth rounding them off. I use a Dremel tool for this, setting it between levels 2 and 4. This process rounds the edges, giving them a more natural look. To make the foam shiny, you can seal the pores, which is very visible here. I use a heat gun for that and go over the foam. To shape the foam, I also use a heat gun. I heat the foam, making it soft, and then bend it. I use painter's tape to hold it into shape while it cools. Afterwards, you can remove the tape. You can also incorporate details into foam, as shown here. I have added wear marks to using the Dremel again. When using the Dremel, always remember to wear safety glasses and mask. You can use level 4 for this process. Here I create D by not just painting the pattern on, but also cutting along them with a utility knife beforehand. This gives a slight 3D effect. I will demonstrate that. You only lightly cut into the foam with the utility knife, not all the way through. You can see the deep here. Then you heat the area again with the heat gun. That's when the magic happens. Now the foam splits at that spot, creating a gap. If you want the area to be a bit more rougher and less clean, you can go over it again with the Dremel. This helps create structures in the individual pieces. For painting, I mainly use these 4 brushes. You don't need a whole bunch of brushes. First, a large flat brush for priming the armor and applying paint over large areas, as you can see here. A small brush for details in case you need to get into the tight corners. This one is for small surface details, and I use the old brush for rougher applications, like rear and tear effects, as shown here. And also on the side to give it a rough, rustic look. I also have an old sponge, and you can use a kitchen sponge too. I use it to imitate dust and dirt. Now we have flexi paint. I use this to prime the armor. While cosplay shops do have their own primer, it's more expensive, so I prefer to use flexi paint. Primer is applied before you start painting the armor in its actual color. The primer seals the foam. Usually you only need one layer if you don't dilute the primer too much. When wet, the primer is white, and when dry, it becomes transparent. When painting, it's important to use flexible paints so that the foam remains movable. That's why I use acrylic paints. The brands doesn't matter, these are just the ones I work with. However, I recommend the Reese brand for metallic looks, as they have very realistic and opaque colors, as you can see here. Finally, let's talk about the different types of fasteners. First, there are bucket clips, which you often see on backpacks. To attach them, you can use contact glue to stick straps into the armor. You can also sew or glue the straps onto the buckle clip to connect everything. I also often use Velcro. It's useful when you want to attach shoulder plates to the chest piece. You can glue it down here and on the other piece, allowing you to connect both parts easily. This method also makes storage much easier. There are different types of Velcro as well. I use a double-sided one that can hook into itself, so I don't have to worry about which piece goes through when I attach them. A little tip to make the Velcro last longer, I trim the corners to round them off. This helps prevent the corner from peeling off more easily later on. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments.